Hi, this is Aaron Eisberg-Nog from Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and you're listening to Beyond Trek. You can follow them on Twitter at Beyond Trek Pod and on Facebook at Beyond Trek Productions.
This is Beyond Trek Podcast, your source for Star Trek on social media and around the web. I'm Big J.
I'm Marie.
And I'm Dag, the Trivia Master. You can find us on Facebook at Beyond Trek Podcast and on Twitter at Beyond Trek Pod.
Red alert.
Smash, what do we have on the agenda for today?
Today, we're going to be talking to Matt and Peter with Phantastic Geek, Star Trek podcasting, and what comes with growing an audience.
Matt, Peter, welcome to our podcast.
Hello, thanks for having us.
Thank you so much for having us. Looking forward to this conversation.
I've been looking forward to it too. And it's we're going to really get into what you guys do, your podcast. But before that, I'd like to hear a little bit about yourselves, whatever you're willing to tell us and our listeners. Matt, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Well, I started podcasting in 2011 by rewatching Lost and talking about every episode as I went along. And it was around that time that I met Pete out there in the real world. And, we found ourselves talking about a lot of pop culture stuff. And before too long, hey, why don't we take these conversations, turn them to a podcast? And was it 2013, Pete? We were branded as Phantastic Geek and out there having these conversations.
Yes.
So here we are. We tend to focus on certainly geeky stuff like the Marvel Cinematic Universe and all the TV shows there. Then with Star Trek Discovery reaching kind of the pre-production status, we said, hey, we're gonna start to podcast that, and haven't looked back. Here we are excited about the whole enchilada.
Peter, how about you?
Trained as a journalist, was a full-time reporter for many years. Run into Matt and suddenly able to put that to use in a whole new light. The Marvel stuff was easy, but with Star Trek, it's truly a labor of love for the both of us. And the moment there was a Star Trek show, a new one on the horizon, it was a very clear do for both of us. Star Trek Discovery and now Star Trek Picard. We'll be doing the Section 31 show as well. And have not looked back ever since. 18 podcast feeds on iTunes and counting.
I've been looking at your site, and you guys are definitely keeping busy with the podcast. It's not only Star Trek, as you mentioned, but I saw Marvel in there, a few other different franchises. And it's interesting that you said you've come from a journalism background, because I do have some background in that as well. And I think you'll agree with this. This is the great thing about podcasting is there's not a lot of competition. Well, there's competition, but no one's telling you that you can't be on a podcast or radio. It's not like a traditional journalism kind of thing where you've got to you've got to know somebody, get your foot in the door. Competing, et cetera, is just anyone who wants to can wake up one day and say, you know what, I want to start doing a podcast.
Yeah, completely agree. In the way that social media has just flattened the earth again, that somebody like me can have 10,500 followers on Twitter and you drum up an audience, and every morning it's waking up on my phone and people asking, where's the podcast about the Watchmen? Where's this? Where's that? And, Matt and I, we really fancy ourselves as prolific and just, 2, 3, 4, 5 episodes a week, just get stuff out there. What was it? 159 podcasts in 2018, Matt, and we're nearly on a pace to surpass that at this point.
Yeah, it was about that. And certainly at some point, we're going to have to say no to one of these shows. I think that was part of the crazy thing of like, hey, let's do the Marvel Cinematic Universe. There's a TV show. A couple of years after that, there's, 4, 5, 6 TV shows on in a calendar year. Same thing. Hey, let's do the new Star Trek now. Fast forward a couple of years from now, how many Star Treks will be on in different forms, whether it's the live action stuff, et cetera, et cetera. But it's always a fun sandbox to play in, and it's an opportunity for for us to kind of us to present it the way we want to present it, kind of talking about that sense of kind of the older style of you need to get your foot in the door, that kind of thing. If somebody wants to listen to 12 hours a day of Star Trek podcasts, they're out there. If they want to listen to just hours, there's that, and there's everything in between. So we can put our spin on it, and we can be happy with the product and meet up with people who enjoy what we have to say.
Now, growing that audience, because you said that if people want to listen to 12 hours of Star Trek podcasts, it's out there, and there's plenty to listen to, which you're right. There are a lot of Star Trek podcasts, and when you created yours, what was the thought behind how are we going to get in there, to get our little slice of the pie, when so many podcasts seem to be that episode review show? So what was your angle in regards to creating it? How did you set out to set yourselves apart, where if someone wanted to find your podcast or to get interested in it, what was your hook?
I think with Phantastic Geek, the thing we've had from the beginning is a real sense of structure, is a real sense of, okay, we're going to give you the recap. We're not going to read something off. I mean, I won't even say it, Matt, the W word. All right, Wikipedia. We're going to tell you what we see on some of the podcasts. Star Trek Discovery, for instance, we take notes and we take you through blow by blow, and we will alternate back and forth and have that conversation. And then we're going to talk about the various threats in an episode. And then we're going to get into our theories, and then we're going to hear from our listeners. And we pretty much maintain that structure across all 18 of the podcast feeds we currently have. But I think where people have responded the most, what we seem to get the most feedback about is, hey, I can turn this on in my car and I might have children, and you guys don't swear every other word, if at all ever. And you have rational conversations that are not fanboy freakouts. And you seem like people that might be able to, inhabit the real world.
And I'll just add to that. I think that we both have kind of broad interests in terms of film and television production. So it's not just kind of recapping the drama of an episode. Part of that discussion might involve, I think this was an effects shot, or, I wonder how they did that. Was this digital? Was this a green screen background? Really interesting Steadicam move, things like that, where it's not, as I said, it's not just kind of plot driven, although that's obviously the backbone, but it's also that kind of whole enchilada of, oh man, it turns out that the Vulcan graduation day scene, that's a library in outer Toronto, and things like that, where it's kind of that whole production point of view when possible.
As a listener to your podcast, I really like how you have that set up, where you go into, discussing it, and just in general, how you have planned out your episode. It even carries over to the new Picard series that you guys are doing too. But what's really interesting is, even though I follow the Picard series, you guys take it a step more and go more in depth into it than I have seen too, just with articles. So, I mean, you guys are doing a great job.
Thank you. I mean, it'll obviously, we don't have anything to recap as far as content just yet. I mean, we had the one little teaser, but, as we get closer, we'll start to delve in thematically in terms of, all right, what are we going to call our segments? Matt is, the engineer extraordinaire when it comes to that, and coming up with the sounds and everything like that. And again, I think we've just been so fortunate in that people have responded. I mean, the amount of emails and Twitter correspondence and Facebook, et cetera, that we get, it's just a driving force. It makes it very, very easy to do this.
I think also there's that, particularly with Star Trek, there's that desire on our end for it to be as authentic as possible. To me, it's no problem. You want to do 20 minutes on theories about the uniforms in Picard, though we have yet to see actual badges. Here's theories on what the badges could look like. Boom, that immediately takes me back to the summer of 1988, in between seasons 1 and 2 of Next Generation, and I'm on vacation somewhere and I'm flipping through my Star Trek Next Generation official magazine and like, look, 1 dot is ensign, 2 dot is lieutenant, and so forth. And Star Trek in particular is so rich to just dive on into that stuff that otherwise it's like, oh, we're just talking about costumes. It's not costumes, it's uniforms and all that kind of enthusiasm.
Especially if you are in deep with the material like we all are, it's almost as if you live and breathe, this stuff. You might not want to readily admit that, but we do. And there are certainly different trivia pieces, factoids, the things like that we know. Whereas unless we're on a game show, how do you show off those skills? And that's what's great about the podcast is you can do that. You can do that, and you don't have people. I was about to say you don't have people judging you, but yes, you do. But you can do it without restriction. And one of the things that you just mentioned that I think is a big plus is to remember the families and the kids, because Star Trek is something that we try to get others into. And when you're talking about podcasts, I think that's a big thing. When you mentioned the cursing, not doing that, and it's one. I can tell you, it's I don't try, and none of us on this one try to go out of our way for profanity, but you're not on a how do I want to say it, a network broadcast where there's rules. You don't have that, but you raise a very good point, is that because it's pretty much the wild west of broadcasting, you've got to worry about that. You can be driving in your car listening to a very good discussion. You've got your kids, your family in there, and you would kind of prefer that during this podcast that or that podcast you're listening to, that kind of thing doesn't happen.
Yeah, and I think too, Matt could tell you a little bit more on the technical end. Again, I get into it from more of the editorial, the reportorial, but just in terms of iTunes and where we put our stuff between that and our website on phantasticgeek.com, the clean rating on iTunes, and it would be akin to an R rating in a film. I mean, you could only do so much. And, when we sit and we don't talk about numbers, it's the one thing we don't do in terms of listenership. And again, like you mentioned, the wild west, but that we're listened to in 86 countries, that we hear from people all over the world. I mean, we have a regular listener in the Netherlands who was just so gratified.
Do they have internet out there and everything?
I think the windmills power it somehow.
Hopefully they don't cause cancer, right?
Right, exactly.
But he was just so gratified that we shifted our deadline for feedback for the second season of Discovery so that he could make it. And the patrons that we have on patreon.com, I mean, never would have figured in a million years there were one person that wanted to listen to me talk Star Trek with another person. I mean, when I met Matt, I was in the end stages of what the two of us refer to as my Trek mitzvah. I went start to finish, first episode to the last episode, every single one watched in order.
What order did you go through?
I used the air date order.
All right.
I had seen a number of them. I had not seen all of them. And I finished and I had seen all of them. And then we got into podcasting. And like I said, the minute a Star Trek series was announced, It's like I look at Matt, Matt looks at me. It's gonna happen, and we've had that happen, but rarely. We're doing the first live action Star Wars show that'll be on Disney Plus, The Mandalorian. Again, that was very, very easy as far as we'll do that. We'll fit that in. We've got to learn, like Matt said, at some point to say no. But the most gratifying thing are the listeners, but what is the second most gratifying thing is when you get the VIP listener and suddenly things are winding up in your lap and in your inbox. That's really exciting too. And, as somebody who has developed an interest in writing TV and who's written unproduced TV at this point, that's something I really need potentially to, work in those circles. So yeah, Matt.
Well, I'll just say it's a double-edged sword. We've had it happen once in the Star Trek venue and once outside of Star Trek, where somebody involved with the production reaches out, and it's this double-edged sword because sometimes it comes with caveats like, "Hey, you two guys can be told this, but don't tell anybody else." And I'm looking at my phone, and I'll, if it comes my way, send it to Pete, vice versa. Then it's like, oh my goodness, like we can't bite the hand that fed us, but that's those are some really cool moments, albeit really unfortunately private ones.
Well, yeah, you're right, because if you get to that point where someone does notice at that level and start sending you things like that, as soon as you bite that hand that feeds you, then you can almost forget about it, because it's difficult enough to get that kind of attention. And it's the same thing. I've told Smash this before. I'm hoping to get us noticed because I'm taking that first offer. Every man has their price, and I'm cheap. $20, buy this podcast, the rights to it, whatever. It's I don't know that we're going to retire off of this, but no, that's I think the thing I'm looking forward to the most is someone at CBS or Paramount saying, well, you've got to pay royalties for saying the name Star Trek, so here you go, copyright infringement. It's like, oh yeah, great. That's just right up my alley.
We were the first Star Trek Discovery podcast on iTunes. And let's just say CBS reached out, hey, give us a call. And I give the call, and Matt and I are, all right, what is this all about? This is it. This is it. And it was essentially that discussion. You cannot use the Star Trek and podcast in that particular order. And I said, doesn't seem to be an issue with any of the 6 or 7 Marvel TV shows we do. And there was some polite, if direct, conversation. And I said, all right, we'll get back to you on what we would have. And the result is that our Star Trek Discovery podcast is called Discovery, a Star Trek podcast. However, there's been no such communication about Star Trek Picard, and that's not going to change unless some legal paperwork is sent our way.
That's pretty interesting, actually, to have them reach out to you. I know around that time they were doing a bunch of that.
Yeah, and I think that it was such a strange environment to be in, where people that are corporate and not creative are, certainly in our view, we're trying to stifle. We're two guys with a couple of computers. We're happy to talk about Star Trek, this new Star Trek that you have to pay for, but we're happy to talk about it. And to have that, like, to get that sense of this big giant, corporate dog, and to get the attention. Hey, attention is nice, but then this sense of, hey, there are boundaries out there that you guys might be approaching. Oh, we just want to talk about this show, and hopefully it's a good show. It was a very strange circumstance to be in. And I think ultimately, what good did it do to them? We didn't call it the Star Trek Discovery podcast by Phantastic Geek. We called it Discovery, a Star Trek podcast by Phantastic Geek. Okay, I guess that preserved something, or that let somebody at PR feel they had preserved the brand or something. I don't know.
And mind you, there's like 15 podcasts, if you go on iTunes and search Star Trek Discovery, that are going to come up and say Star Trek Discovery podcast. So clearly this lady either got overwhelmed or doesn't do much of a job with this anymore or whatever. So yeah. But Matt alluded to that first time that we had the interaction with production people. And, for me, the light bulb moment was I was using a term on the podcast for an environment they had created on the show. And we hear through the back channel, oh, they're calling that in the writer's room now. And that to me was like, holy smokes, something we said is now being discussed in their writer's room, and the snake eats its tail.
Oh, that's really interesting. So, they're listening and paying attention. That's good to know. When it comes to your listeners, how do you guys promote that on Reddit specifically?
I mean, within the last 4 to 5 months, I've been putting up the links on Reddit. Basically with the idea, okay, here's the link to a new episode, whatever the property is, whether it's Discovery, whether it's the Marvel stuff we're working on, whether it's Star Trek Picard. Here's a couple bullets of what you can expect in the discussion. And then, as always, our listener feedback. And we get that through Facebook. We get that through Twitter. We have a voicemail line that isn't tremendously utilized, but there are people who have called in, and I have to say we've gotten the least amount of response from Reddit, but I'm seeing more and more.
No, wait a minute. You mean that you're doing this to the tune of 1 or 2 upvotes a time, and you're not happy with that?
It's a little bit more through some of the other social media channels.
Well, yeah, and I think that's the challenge right there, and that was the part that I really wanted to spend a good amount of time on here, was just the fact that, and Matt, I'd like to hear your take on this, but it seems as though the social media channels, when it comes to whether you're using Twitter, Facebook, et cetera, that those are great and those are going, but then you hit that Reddit meat grinder.
I think that on Reddit, like a lot of other social media interactions, if the plan is to create the big viral thing, then it's not going to go viral and it's not going to be authentic. It's really truly about that authentic interaction, whether it's a one-to-one conversation, replying to a post, or sharing a unique observation. And I think that it ultimately is about, as I said, that presenting yourself in that one-to-one way, being accessible, having the conversation back and forth, and not necessarily going for the mic drop kind of moment that you think will get the splash or the vote, the retweet, et cetera, to just, to have that honesty. I think that honesty is what will break through. Maybe not every time, maybe not a lot of the time, but the honesty is what's going to break through to the stranger out there who's scrolling through a screen. And that'll break through more than the kind of perfectly crafted, social media bomb.
Star Trek's always been about intelligence. And I think what's been disappointing is to see, Matt talks about the mic drop moment. We have the naysayers. I mean, this nonsense story in the last 24 hours that Alex Kurtzman has been fired and it's just not public yet is an absolute farce. Yet there are people clicking away on this story because they don't seem to understand there's an agenda behind it. And yes, Discovery has been a show that behind the scenes has suffered problems. But if essentially the Rick Berman of this age was suddenly out, the last place we're ever going to hear it are some of these, agenda-driven, really angry YouTube channels. And I think people have responded to us in the way that we really attempt to steer it down the middle. That, okay, if it calls for criticism, we're going to do it. If it calls for praise, we're going to do it. We're never going to be too high. We're never going to be too low.
Now, and Peter and Matt, you guys picked a couple of the most difficult things, I think, to do a podcast on. One, you're trying to appeal to the Star Trek fans, and that can be difficult in of itself, because I don't want to use the word persnickety, but there's a whole lot of this is my Star Trek, this is how I want it to be, and this is what I want to listen to. And you take that and then you add into it trying to build an audience on Reddit, where you do have kind of fiefdoms and the collections of this is the content that I want to see, this is how I want to run my community, et cetera, et cetera. So tell me what's been some of the bigger challenges in combining, trying to get your podcast, your Star Trek podcast out just about, and it's not just about Star Trek. Let me clarify that that Matt and Peter with Phantastic Geek is not just solely dedicated on Star Trek. They do several other podcasts, but of course, in here we're going to be talking more about Star Trek. But what has been the biggest challenge that you guys have had in trying to get audience to your podcast and trying to come to Reddit to do that?
I don't want to speak for Matt, but I think the biggest challenge is ourselves. I mean, we both work very hard. I think we both have very high standards. People try to make it that it's more than it is recording a podcast. We jump on, we do our thing, we put it out there. We really pride ourselves on quick turnaround. In that first season of Discovery, when it was, popping up on a Sunday night, we were watching it, we were recording it, it was available for you on a Sunday night. And people truly respond to that. Reddit is just a different frontier from all those other different frontiers, Twitter, Facebook, etc. No one of them is a complete audience. They're all a slice. And you mentioned the fiefdoms. In the past week to 10 days, I had a interaction with a fellow on Reddit talking about the Picard pilot, and I got mansplained by another man that it's not a pilot. They're making the series. And I said, oh, okay, but it's still called a pilot. It's still how it works.
I saw that. Yes, in the subreddit r/Picard. Yeah, and that's you're right. That is very. You did, yeah. You got mansplained, which I'm. I don't want to, but you had a very good point. You really did, and I think the point you were trying to make was that it's a pilot in terms of it's the first episode. Yeah. This is not a guaranteed thing. And I think that's the pitfall that we get into with Star Trek, is that there's this assumption that anything Star Trek is going to work and that it's going to be a show. And you get that pushback of, well, actually, it's not a pilot, it's the show. Okay, well, yes, you're right. It's not a closed door pilot, not like The Cage was. The Cage was not broadcast public. The very first pilot was more of a trying to sell it to the studio, didn't get picked up. Second pilot did with Where No Man Has Gone Before with William Shatner and playing Captain Kirk. So I think in the age that we have grown up in, there was not a pilot for the next generation. It came on and it happened. Same with Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise, and I think we got kind of spoiled by that. And I agree with you. I do think of the first couple episodes of Discovery was like the pilot. The first episode of Picard, the pilot. But that's what you're going to find on Reddit is you've got I don't know, you're going to get corrected on everything from your grammar to how you say something to the term that you use for a show. And on top of that, when you're trying to bring an audience to your podcast, and you mention in different subreddits, you're probably sitting there all day refreshing your inbox, waiting for that you've been banned, or this person does not want you talking about your thing. And is that also? Would you say that that's kind of been your interaction, or not? How welcoming or not welcoming has it been to be on Reddit when it comes to dealing with these moderators?
Knock on wood, that's the only negative interaction I've had. And again, just trying to, I mean, the place I think where I've had to reach out the most has been on Facebook, and there's a lot of Facebook groups, particularly like Star Trek. And I would reach out to the administrators beforehand and just say, hey, would it be okay to post links to this? I think your group, the people in your group would be interested in having this available. And I've never encountered a problem with the Marvel groups. It's been either very welcoming or no, you can't do that. Okay. You're going to tell me I can't do that? You really want to control a group that much? But again, I think it speaks so much to the accepting nature of, 99% of Star Trek fans and viewers, that they understand the whole infinite diversity, infinite combinations kind of thing, as opposed to some of the canon warriors that occasionally Matt and I have come across.
I will add that I think in terms of making that connection on Reddit, certainly in terms of Phantastic Geek making that connection, sometimes I'm a little Pollyannish. Here we are, it's the 30th anniversary of Field of Dreams, and it's like, oh, if you build it, they will come. Well, no, you do need to kind of get that message out there. You do need to kind of be your own hype man sometimes, and certainly in the creative partnership with Pete. I think he's a little bit more oriented towards that. Again, I might have the blinders on, not just because I'm fiddling around in GarageBand or I'm uploading it to the website or whatever, but I just think in terms of my personality, like, oh, naturally people will find it. Well, that's not always the case. So Pete's a little bit more maybe realistic that, hey, some of those conversations need to be started on Reddit, be started online, et cetera. And he might be the one starting it. I think too, just in terms of those interactions, I remember I had a discussion on Reddit where, it's just gone out of my head right now. Where I know what it was. I'm always interested with any of this TV and film stuff. I'm always interested on influences within the story and influences from outside the story. You look at something like Discovery, having showrunners fired a third of the way through season 2. To me, it's a fair game discussion to say as we get to those episodes where the power was changed, what is there any evidence left in the story? And somebody on Reddit was saying, oh, you're being mean because this person was fired. And I'm not saying, this person was fired because they're a terrible human being. I'm saying, is this thread in episode 206, is this a thread that maybe, will be abandoned as we're watching the episodes for the first time? Will this be abandoned because this is from the old regime or that sort of thing? And that was a case where on Reddit, all right, we're going to agree to disagree because, I've gotten a finger wag for overstepping the line, even though in my mind it was just part of the critical discussion of what goes into making this TV show. It's not just writers with feather quills and whatnot. It's hardworking people. Sometimes people cross the line. There's, we're on our 4th showrunners we had in the season 3, and it's all part of the discussion.
That's really impressive. Going out there and being your own hype man is a hard job to do, and it's unforgiving and relentless, but it can also be a lot of fun because you have a lot of freedom to do that.
Yeah, I mean, there's no book on how to do this, and a lot of it is fumbling around is, all right, I'm on a quick ride here. Let me see what's what and see what I can post up. And where we're at in our schedule right now, podcasting two Marvel shows, one of which all 13 episodes dropped on Friday, the other which airs on Fridays, and sprinkling 3 of those episodes a week, and then boom, here's a Picard teaser, and boom, here's this, here's that. And Matt and I just coordinating between the regular gigs. Hey, this is when the side hustle will happen tonight. I'll see you at 6, and we'll podcast Picard for 40 minutes and get that up. And then the quest of getting people to it. But again, it's just been so gratifying the way that people have responded and want to talk about this and have such thoughtful things to say. I think we've had so little negative interaction through the podcast specifically. And then we go to New York Comic Con, and we go to, Star Trek New York, and we run into people who have listened to us. Some of them who are nearby, and some coming from afar. And, it really echoes the sentiment of the property we're podcasting there.
You guys talking about all the positive feedback that you've gotten is interesting, especially when it comes to Reddit, because my experience on Reddit is that moderators just, when it comes to self-promotion or just putting your podcast out there or just promoting anything in general, they're pretty picky and can even remove your post. How do you go about communicating with moderators? Do you just send them a DM? Do you wait for their promotion days?
Haven't really had a ton of interaction in that
Or do you
regard.
just put it out there and wait for someone to throw that hammer at you?
Yeah, I haven't, again, knock on wood, haven't had the hammer yet. Was directed one time, hey, put something in the post about what's going on in your podcast. Okay.
I saw that too.
Yeah, I like to think I can take direction pretty well. And again, it's just so early in these platforms. What style exists as a journalist. Style was everything. Okay, I'm going to give you 250 words. I'm going to give you the news right up front, maybe a little bit of color right after that. Tell you the what's, the whys. Why should you care? And I'm always driven from the event perspective when it comes to what it is we're podcasting, and Matt comes at it from that real strong technical sense and then a sense of story. And I think we balance each other out, and that's why we've known each other since 2010, but Phantastic Geek since 2013, and we did some stuff beforehand, kind of in the BC portion of our partnership.
Well, and I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, but I just think, I zag where he zags, and that's what's always made it effective.
Well, and then the other thing that I wanted to bring up is the fact that you're talking about getting out there, trying to promote it and hoping for the best. And Smash just brought up, how the moderators approach you and treat you with this. And it can be any level of people or thought that you come across. Not everyone is going to be a very welcoming, yes, please grow your podcast. I think that's what we need to do. We're all in it together. We've got to work together. There was a moderator in Star Trek Sub r/Treknobabble, and he's not a moderator now, but he said something about a rising tide lifts all ships. And I think that is something that you do see to a certain degree, but unfortunately you kind of see the opposite of that of kind of this is a self-contained kind of thing. I don't want you to use what I've built to try to build your thing or to mention that and grow that, which makes it difficult to get that out there because you feel that you have a good topic and something that's worth listening to. But on the flip side of that, I can kind of see it from the other end. And that ties into what I said before about that there's no one telling you that you can't do a podcast. You're only limited as to your time or your format or the technical part, things like that. There is no one that will walk up to me and say, no, you're not good enough for a podcast because you don't know the source material that well, you don't have a good voice, or any number of things. There's no one saying that. I do a podcast. It could be solo, it could be with with people like co-hosts like Smash and Dag. You guys are a duo, Matt and Peter, and you just do it, and no one's telling you not to. And I think part of the challenge in that is that everyone's doing it. So everybody that comes up with their own flavor of episode review podcast is out there on Facebook or Twitter or Reddit as soon as they've done their first recording. Hey, here's my new podcast. Report.
Sir, an unknown signal has interfered with the podcast.
Can you locate it?
Originating from Earth. It's a site called Anchor.fm.
Open the channel.
This is the part where I shill for Anchor.fm. Let's see. Anchor.fm has a complete toolbox that gives you total creative freedom to produce shows right from your ship's computer or personal communicator. Wait, what? And they take care of all the distribution so it shows up on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and a bunch of other places? And it's free? A wise man can hear a profit in the wind. Rule of acquisition 22. Wait, there's more? They'll give you Latinum? No? Just whatever money passes for currency on 21st century Earth? Good enough. Get on your pad and download the app, or bring up Anchor.fm right away. And remember rule of acquisition 33. It never hurts to suck up to the boss.
Close the channel. We need to get the podcast back online.
Boosting the signal gain now through the main deflector dish.
I talk about and review episodes of Star Trek Discovery. Okay, that's great. You're there's 11 million podcasts doing that, and you're already promoting yours one episode in. So there is kind of I guess I want to say an oversaturation of podcasts and promoting because everyone's jumping in and wanting to get their little slice of the fandom. And that's the thing is Star Trek on Reddit is not popular on Reddit. And that was something that was said to me in another one of our recordings, the early one that I did, is that's where we have a very tough uphill battle. Is that Star Trek is such a smaller, self-contained. You take all of the Star Trek communities on Reddit, all of them, put them together, and you're not even touching some of these smaller Star Wars communities out there. It is just Star Trek is dwarfed by pretty much anything and everything out there. I mean, for God's sakes, a subreddit starts up today that is about drawings of Garfield being kind of demonic, and that's on the front page every day. Whereas Star Trek subreddits are, you get 12 subscribers and then never hear from them again.
Big J, look, demonic Garfield is great. That's all I'm saying. But I do agree. It's challenging on Reddit. The whole Star Trek fandom is it's lacking. I don't know if it's just because there's just not a lot of people who watch Star Trek who also go on Reddit. I don't know if it's because, we're too busy upvoting demonic Garfield. It could be anything.
Or pictures
Matt,
of cats.
We need to get on that demonic Garfield podcast.
Absolutely.
I like to think it's because Star Trek makes you use your brain and everything else spoon feeds things to you and allows you to just passively participate in whatever it is. Star Trek makes you get involved and think about people and feelings and where you are in your own life and how to deal with things.
And my impulse would be to back that up. But I think the people that are into other things are thoughtful as well. And I don't like to hold one over the other. And, there's so much gatekeeping that goes on. There's so much, holding people at bay. We just want to talk about the shows we watch, and we want to attempt at least to do it in an intelligent way. And we'll make corny jokes. Gosh, I know I do. And again, to counterpoint Matt, I have the lousy voice and he has the golden pipes. And again, it's just about creating a balance.
You've got a good voice, Matt. I'll tell you that.
Matt
Both
has
of you
a
do.
wonderful voice, and I keep trying to push him to voice work.
No, you both do. I love your podcast. It's easy to follow. I like that
Thank
you guys also do Marvel shows and that you guys go in depth of all the series that you do. I learned things that I didn't know already about the Picard show, so thank you for that. When it comes to specifically promoting on Reddit, please keep doing it because, I don't really...
Fight the fight, guys.
Right. And people like me, I don't go searching for podcasts. I see them on Reddit. I see them advertised and I can go from there. So thank you.
Thank you.
I think too, in terms of the Star Trek fan debate on Reddit or anywhere else, I think that we kind of look back. Well, we're under this umbrella now. Everything's social media, especially in the last couple of years. It's this it's also the Wild West of social media, it seems. Who knows how far you could go with a Twitter account these days. But I think that we forget that this kind of choosing of sides amongst what hopefully at the end of the day is the Star Trek family. That's not a new thing. I'm sure we've all seen the newspaper clipping from 1987 about, here's the new Mr. Spock. It's the guy from Roots, and this is bound to fail. And getting all those details wrong, of course. Same thing. I know when I was, when it was mid 90s and I went to my first, fan meetup thing here at the Jersey Shore. There's a guy who's like, Next Generation is not real Star Trek. And in our Star Trek fan group, the ship that we have, it can't be gray. That would just get shot out of the stars. We need to paint the ship black. And it was like, bro, hold on. I'm not really that concerned about the color of the ship not being able to be seen in my fake TV show, where they shoot, they shoot lasers at each other sometimes. So I think the debate that's going on is part of Star Trek. Do we lose sight of it sometimes? Sure. Are there people who, miss the idea of infinite diversity and infinite combinations by saying these are the wrong kind of characters to have on because they're bad for us? Yes, there's those people too. And maybe they're sitting in the other room at the Star Trek family get together. But the Star Trek family proper, these debates are part and parcel with being a Star Trek fan.
Absolutely. Don't even remind Big J that I don't know all the names of all the ships that have ever occurred on all of the shows. Because I just don't.
But you don't need to, and you shouldn't have to. And I think that's a thing. Maybe Star Trek, if there's a negative to it, it's, the stereotypes that have been proffered there, that, basements, so on and so forth. I mean, Shatner going on Saturday Night Live and being able to play with that, but it's the double-edged sword that's.
Oh, wait a minute. Hold on. We're getting a red alert. So you guys are going to be doing something special for us. We're about roughly that 47-minute mark. It's not perfect. I hope you get that reference, but here's what we've got for you. We're doing something new in our podcast, and Dag is our master of trivia. When it comes to Star Trek knowledge and the tidbits, the factoids, this guy is good. So here's what we're going to do. As a new part of our podcast, we're going to do a little impromptu trivia. So you guys are the experiment. We're going to hit you with it first. Going to do a little trivia with Dag is what that's called. So Dag, you're up.
Hey guys, This is just going to be a quick round. It's 5 questions focusing on the characters from Star Trek: The Next Generation. Do you think you're up to the challenge?
Absolutely. At least I hope so.
All right. This first one is a doozy. What is Deanna Troy's favorite food?
Oh, come on. It's chocolate ice cream.
Chocolate, yeah.
Okay, I'll give that one to you.
We'll give you an easy one for confidence.
In the 7th season episode, Thine Own Self, Data loses his memory and unwittingly distributes metal fragments with what harmful quality?
Oof.
That's
Radioactive, maybe?
They are radioactive. Ding, ding,
Oh.
ding. Good
Okay,
job.
that was a guess for the record.
Hey, we'll edit the part where you said that out. It's not a guess. You knew it. You're good.
Well, and then if you remember, they thought that his name was radioactive because that was what was on his case, and he said radioactive, and that
For whatever reason, Data's carrying an Imagine Dragons album around with him. All right. Question 3. When Captain Picard goes on his captain's holiday, he gets entangled with which archaeologist femme fatale?
Oh,
Vosh.
yeah, Vosh, yeah.
Ding, ding, ding. Question number... what were we on? 4? Yeah.
4,
Okay. In the Next Generation episode, The Game, Data uses what to undo the mind control? True.
Isn't it a pulse?
It is. It's a strobing pulse light.
There we go.
And question 5. What is Keiko O'Brien's maiden name?
Oh, gosh.
Ishikawa?
Oh my
what
gosh,
brain
you're
gave me.
amazing.
You got it?
You got that?
Fantastic.
Wow.
Good job.
Well done.
All that
I
time
could-
spent leafing through the chronology and through the encyclopedia all those years ago finally paid off.
There
Yep.
you go.
I've seen every episode of Star Trek, and I was thinking, okay, I've seen the episode. We all know Keiko, but I could not think of her maiden names. That was a good one. You got me on that one, Dag.
Well, I'm glad I got somebody out of it. I wanted to ask some questions about your earlier work with Star Trek.
Sure.
I noticed that you did your last Essentials in November of 2016, and commentary tracks are My Peanut Butter and Jelly. Are you planning on doing any more?
The short answer is yes. When time allows.
Right.
I mean, we keep adding shows. We made the determination around Christmas time this past year, 2018, that we would be doing Star Wars live action show, The Mandalorian, that we would be doing Picard was a no-brainer, and that we were going to jump in on the HBO Watchmen show. We're really excited about that. This is the first ever HBO joint that we're getting into. And would love to get back to Essentials. It's just a thing that, between 14 consecutive weeks of Discovery, I think Matt and I have had 1 week in 2019 where we have not had a podcast.
Well, that's
How
a
do you guys
lot
manage
of
to do
time.
so much podcasting?
That's an
I think we
excellent
were-
question, Matt.
I think we were dumb enough to not know that we couldn't, if that's not enough negatives there. And at a certain point, I mean, I remember early on as Phantastic Geek, doing the first season of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and, there'd be one episode in January, one episode in February, and be like, text Pete, hey, how's it going? What's going on in your world? And then I think just because we didn't know it was a bad idea, it's now just become this thing where we podcast a ton of stuff, the shows that we're interested in. I would love to get back to Essentials. I'd love to get back to older episodes, favorite episodes. I know some of the Essentials episodes we did, it was an episode that I remembered fondly or Pete didn't, vice versa, whatever it might be. I think, as Pete said, it's just a matter of we've said we're going to do all these other things, and somehow there continues to be more interesting stuff coming our way. But hopefully we are able to take that look back before too long, because there's great Star Trek on right now. There's great Star Trek in the future, and there's that amazing past behind us as well.
Smash, we do this.
I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, Smash, we do this once a month, and I already feel like we keep busy enough with that, and maybe we should turn this into a weekly thing. They can do it, right? It would be easy, right?
Let's do it.
I wholeheartedly support this idea.
Horrible idea. You guys were supposed to say no, Big J. That is not a good idea, because
we always want to keep talking, and we can just do it more often. I'm sure we can figure out what to say.
Well, and you're right, and I think that also really takes us into the choice of the format. And Matt and Peter are doing a podcast where they are talking about the news in the episodes. However, there's always kind of that fear of running out of content, and it's great that there's more Star Trek, because the thing that is a big plus with that, and I know you guys have seen this, is we're getting new content now, finally. And that was with Discovery. People are talking about that. With the Picard show, the animated show that's going to be on Nickelodeon. So Star Trek is back, and it's going to give podcasters a lot of things to talk about. And a lot of the social media communities are going to be going again, and I guess charged up and talking about this.
It's in my mind, it's all about the content that you're covering, and it's all about the format that you cover it. So you're absolutely right. There's more Star Trek on the way, more kind of consistent Star Trek than there's been since when it was Next Generation and Deep Space Nine, and Deep Space Nine and Voyager on at the same time. Throw the movies, Next Generation movies in as well. I know for us, we have our normal format where we're digging deep, scene by scene. And then at a certain point, in part because we had a lot of stuff to chug through, but also because some of the Marvel shows they're not built for a super introspective, oh man, let's talk about Steadicam moves in this scene. So we have what we call the rundown format, where things are a little leaner, things are a little quicker. And if it's a property that suits, a 25-minute episode for, 25-minute podcast on an episode, so be it. If it's, some jaw-dropping episode of Discovery where it's a sequel to The Cage and footage is intercut and whatnot, all right, that's an episode where you're going to spend 45, 60, 75 minutes. So again, that kind of marrying of there's the content out there to cover it. Now find the format that works for you.
And I think the thing that Matt and I have seen with a lot of experience of podcasting is that there is a subgenre of podcasters who don't podcast. And we both feel very passionately that the worst thing you can ever do to an audience is neglect them. And, we like to be speedy. We've been called complimentarily speedy. We don't want to overdo it, and we don't want to have haste make waste, but people are passionate and want to talk and listen about these shows. And I feel personally like I'm letting people down when we're not getting them up there. And again, we've been blessed, that we've not had interruption, that we've not had life intrude to a level where we can't do that.
That's an interesting point that you make there, about the listeners, the subscribers, paying attention to them, not the haste, providing that content. And I'm not sure what kind of number of plays or subscribers you guys have. I'm sure it's a lot, but you probably also try not to get too wrapped up in the numbers.
Yeah, I when you look at it that way, I mean, it certainly, again, that people want to listen to me, to Matt, talk about this stuff is in and of itself its own reward. And then that they want our take on this, on that. and then to crossbreed them over, somebody's over on Marvel and listen to Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. with us for 4 seasons, and then it's like, oh my God, you guys are doing Star Trek Discovery. I can't believe it. I'm so excited for that show. Of course I'm going to listen to it.
I think that was kind of where the light bulb went off for us. But prior to Phantastic Geek, we had podcasted a show that was on Fox and quickly canceled. And it was like, oh man, if we're tied to a show and the show isn't well received or canceled or whatever it might be, then that's kind of not good for this hobby long term. But as soon as we slapped the Phantastic Geek sticker on it, we had built up an audience from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., from some other things that were as excited about Star Trek as we are. And same thing, reference was made earlier to, so many people are going to be out there with their Picard pilot, if we can call it that, the Picard pilot podcast review. Well, how many of those are going to be there 10 weeks later for the season finale? But in the interim, everybody's there making their own thing for the first episode. Well, to have that name brand, to have that sense of continuity of, if you're new to us, you can look at our back catalog and say, oh, you are going to stick around for the show, or here are the kind of conversations that you have. Does that suit me as a listener? And then certainly moving forward, the Discovery audience can roll into the Picard audience and so forth. I think particularly too with the debate over Discovery and the uniforms, and is it really Prime Universe, and is Prime created to be a thing that's actually JJ haunting me in my sleep? I think there's going to be that like reverse where, oh well, at least I trust kindly Patrick Stewart. He can teach me about the new Star Trek, and then then audience will discover Discovery anew once Patrick Stewart has told them it's okay to pay for a show in 2019.
Right.
Don't you just love swimming in the pedantic?
Do you guys feel that you get the same amount of viewers for your Star Trek series as you do your Marvel or other series that you do?
I think sometimes as much as we kind of have the Phantastic Geek Foundation in Marvel, let me put it this way: the Netflix model of binge delivered all at once, that kills podcast numbers, and poor us, boo-hoo. I think it also kills discussions, period. It's going to kill discussions on Reddit. It's going to kill discussions at the water cooler. It's going to kill discussions around the dinner table, because we're all watching at different points and this and that, the other. So is Big Bad All Access there not dropping it at once because they want us to pay for multiple months and so on and so forth? Okay, fine. That's the business end. On the creative end, this week's episode is the episode that we watch, and then the episode we podcast, and the episode that we all are thinking about. And I think that's hugely beneficial on the podcast end. And I would just say on the creative end in general, there's kind of this thing, Netflix really doesn't want to go more than 3 seasons on original content. Well, I think part of the health of Star Trek, regardless of how long Discovery runs or how long Picard runs, etc., the health of Star Trek is 1 episode per week. Certainly nowadays, no offense meant to the 90s and when there were the 2 different shows on at the same time, right. But it's a different TV landscape now. To have Star Trek fans concentrating on a Star Trek episode this week, that's better for podcasts, better for fandom, better for discussions, and then better for Star Trek.
The water cooler still exists.
Right. I mean, as someone who binges TV shows and absolutely loves it, it's interesting to think about how that would affect, people like you guys who make episodes every week on it, because you're right. You just have to get to it when you get to it. And, I've already seen them all. So then I'm probably less likely to want to listen through your podcast.
I can't tell you how thankful I am that we're not getting binged on Star Trek, because you're right. By doing an episode every week, it gives the creatives time to absorb it. You've got your podcasts that have time to work with it. Mm-hmm. You have, if you're doing, say, a new meme or a new GIF or new video of something from that episode, there is time to work with that episode to pick out different things, as opposed to if it were all released at once. You are going to get that person that sits and watches the entire thing through in one 12, 13-hour session, and then jumps on the social media to spoil things. This happened and that happened, and I've seen it. Well, but you can't enjoy it. How are you going to enjoy a show? I'm really glad that that Star Trek now is being dropped, where it's great that it's every week. But we did have that period in the first season of Discovery where there was a break in that season. A lot of that was from the show really was going off the rails. I don't know what kind of coke that Kurtzman and oh God, I always forget the name, the first showrunner, not Alex. Yeah, Brian Fuller. Well, I think it's because
there have been so many. It's difficult to keep track.
Right. There's been so many. Well, and it was just that first half of the season was just really going off the rails, I think. And it really took a while to get to the upper echelons, that there's a lot of bad, negative things happening here. And these guys supposed to be running the show, making these calls and these decisions, and the writers aren't going to speak up. I mean, if you're a writer on Star Trek, that's the dream job. And if your showrunner says, okay, we're going to have bald Klingons, they're going to be purple, and we're going to do this and we're going to do that, it's just okay, boss, yeah, let's do that. And here's the thing that I think is really, really taken for granted. I'm going to take you back to June 18th, 1990. Now, only 90s kids will understand this. June 18th, 1990 was part one of The Best of Both Worlds. The season 3. Yep. Who doesn't? The season. I'm getting chills right now talking about it. The season 3 finale, Best of Both Worlds. Picard has been assimilated. He comes up on the screen and does his thing. Your lives, as they have been, are over. From this time forward, you will service us. Everyone's kind of looking at each other on the bridge. What the hell do we do now? The music starts going up. Riker, Mr. Worf, fire. Boom, to be continued. I was standing, I remember vividly where I was when that happened. I was standing in front of the TV and was recording it, because I would record every episode on VHS. And the episode ended. I was in such a state of shock that I did something completely silly and irrational. I rewound the tape a little bit, thinking the episode will continue if I let it play again. And I was 13 at the time. I was certainly not too young to remember, but I remember doing that. Like, okay, this is not rational. Of course, I can't rewind the VHS tape and have this outcome be different. In that summer of 1990 was torture. It was, and the internet was kind of still fresh. There wasn't really the social media like it is today. It wasn't really interconnected. Basically, you had a very good chance of not hearing anything for 3 months. No rumors, no previews, no nothing. Agonizing. It's like, is Captain Picard coming back? What's going to happen? And I really think that audiences today really don't appreciate the fact that there are no cliffhangers like that, where you have to sit for 3 months just on edge over the summer waiting for that season premiere to see what happens. That doesn't happen anymore.
We can illustrate this in that I watched Game of Thrones from the premiere episode once a week when it aired. Matt saw the first episode. When did I lend you that season, Matt? Like a year in?
Yeah, I think it was before season 2 came out, or maybe right around then.
So he watches it. He's kind of iffy on the continuation or not. Couple seasons go by and decides, all right, he's got HBO for a little bit. He's gonna binge it, and we'll live tweet through a lot of these things that air. And even with Discovery airing on a streamer, we would do that. Boom, it's up. All right, we're gonna talk to people while we're doing it. And Matt would repeatedly ask me, who's this character again? What's this person's name? And it's not Matt. It's not his memory. There are actually studies that show that binge watching hurts the retention, the comprehension, as opposed to the once a week idea that you could digest it, that you could be around the water cooler. And I like to think we provide something for both. I mean, obviously, you have fewer shows that drop all at once. And Disney has made the decision that Star Wars will be once a week. Hulu, with rare exception, gives you that once a week. Occasionally, they give you, here's 3 at the start of the season. And Matt and I are breathlessly watching 3 Runaways episodes. Thankfully, we've already seen the first one because of New York Comic Con. Boom, we got that one. And then we get the other 2. And then take a deep breath. And then we've got another one the following week. I mean, you figure out a way to do it. And that's the thing I think we've always been good at. And again, we've been fortunate in that life hasn't interceded in such a way.
I had a question for Peter. In your Picard podcast, I know it's only been like 11 days, you surprised Matt by saying that there were a couple episodes of season 7 of The Next Generation that you hadn't seen yet. When are you going to live stream that so we can see your reactions?
That's a really good, Pete, if you don't mind me taking the question, that's a really good, it's a good question. I remember, it was one of those things we don't overly script the podcasts, and for that to organically happen and to hear Pete's shock and whatnot, I don't know, that'll have to be some kind of special event. The flip side is, in this weird kind of like, playing with a loose tooth kind of sense, I kind of like knowing that Next Generation, of all shows, my nerd OG, my nerd bedrock, that it's not over. And even if that's coming at the expense of, there still are a handful of episodes I haven't seen, which I know sounds counterintuitive and sounds like a poor fandom, but it's kind of like the end isn't there if I don't make it be the end, in a weird way. I don't know, but we'll have to figure out some way for me to see those episodes and for it to be shared with listeners, viewers, whatever it might be.
No, that's how I feel about watching Enterprise. I haven't seen Enterprise yet, and I've been saving it for that right moment. One day I will get around to it. But until then, it's not over yet.
It's been a long road.
I was going to say it. You beat me by that much.
Also,
if from there to here.
If you guys had a pick, what's your favorite Marvel?
But my time is finally here.
Oh, no.
I'm sorry, Smash. Go ahead. Could you redo that? I can't help it. Whenever I hear Enterprise, it's in my head.
Right.
Which version of it?
I really liked the first 2 seasons version.
The slower one.
It really, because I watched probably 70% of 75% of Enterprise when it originally aired. And I have to admit, when I was going through and doing my rewatch, I didn't do a rewatch of TNG, but this was the last couple years. I had to get in Deep Space Nine because I mostly missed a lot of season 5 and 6. Voyager, kind of the same way, because these shows, their later seasons were when I was in college, and I just remember Fox seemed to go through this period where they kept, or at least for me in my area, they kept changing like the date and the time that the shows were on. And that on top of being in college and partying and everything, I just kind of, that thread of watching Star Trek sort of unraveled. So when I was about to get back into, I had finished DS9, Voyager, was about to approach Enterprise, and it was going to be tough because I remember thinking, God, I'm gonna have to sit through the theme song. Here's the other thing about when they decided to do the up tempo for season 3, and season 3 of Enterprise was this whole dark season. Earth is on the brink. You had this. The weapon will be ready in 2 weeks. It's been a long road. A crewman gets freaking hanged. It's been a long road. And it's just like, it does not fit. It did not fit. And then you've got
that
T'Pol.
Skip intro button has never been.
Oh my God.
Useful.
T'Pol screams out in agony. It's been a long road. So yeah,
there's the podcast. There's the Enterprise podcast where you transition from the terrible thing that has happened to the upbeat music. I'd listen to that.
Right. Yeah. So it did not fit. It did not fit the tone of that season to upbeat, up tempo, the intro. And I would have to say either I didn't notice the skip intro button on Netflix, or it was not a thing yet at that point. So yeah, I had to sit through all of it.
So Smash is asking, what is your favorite Netflix Marvel series?
Ooh, that's a toughie. It changes.
Right.
I could say for me, probably.
And why is it Punisher season 2?
It is so not Punisher season 2.
I have to know which one of the series that you guys have done on specifically the Netflix Marvel series, which ones have been the most fun for you guys to watch and, podcast about?
I think for me, probably Jessica Jones. And I have a somewhat difficult time putting that into words because particularly in the first season, what she's going through and kind of the comic book language and the comic book genre, is exploring assault and things of that sort. So it's not an upbeat season, and she's not an upbeat character, but I find something really affirming in her sense of self-determination. Again, it's not kind of she's not in a great circumstance in life, and it's not a pleasant season that she goes through. None of the seasons, but particularly that first season. But it's a character that I find myself really drawn to in terms of that sense of grit and that sense of comeback. And I don't know, to me, albeit as a guy in the world nowadays and whatnot, but just I appreciate the perspective that it brings me kind of wrapped up nonetheless in this kind of comic book tropey story.
And Matt's been very consistent on that. I have to applaud him for that. For me, I mean, getting the first season of Daredevil, the first Marvel Netflix, and, we cranked out 3 episodes in that first weekend, 2 in the first day. Really baptism by fire for us, the first streamer that we got into. But I never felt as cool in my life as watching Luke Cage. So that has a very special place in my heart. And, I think we expected that Iron Fist, albeit off, the cliffhanger, would get canceled. But when Luke Cage went down a week later, and, part of this gig too is whenever news breaks, we've got to cover it. So whether it's Picard putting a teaser out, or tomorrow's Captain Picard Day, and Matt and I are pretty much on alert that preparing to record a Jessica Jones podcast, and the potential to get 2 in there as well. But Yeah, I'd say Daredevil or Luke Cage, depending on when you ask me. That first season of Punisher was tremendous. That second season, I'm mostly trying to forget.
Now, okay, so this is the thing that I'm curious about, and I may have missed it, but for our listeners, want to have you guys talk about this again. Now, the two of you are doing this remotely. I'm assuming you're not like sitting in the same room together.
No, it's done remotely. We do it over Skype. We in fact, if anything, it's almost more of a technological challenge when we are in the same room. You know, whether it's are we on separate computers and this and that the other. But yep, doing it remotely.
Can your mic hear me when I'm talking, and then it's crossfading?
Exactly.
So, and that's the thing that I think is amazing is you guys are doing all of this podcasting, and that's probably one of the things that I think has been a double-edged sword. It's great with podcasting that you can do this with people that are not just within your circle of friends, because you may not want that, and that's the thing that I think is interesting to what you guys do is, and not everyone does this, but you kind of are separating the real life from the online life, that online social media, and whether that hinders growth of a podcast or not. You guys are putting in this time where you're doing all of this stuff, doing multiple podcasts, making that time for it. Whether you're in crazy different time zones or whatever. But that's one of the things I kind of wanted to get into a little bit is the fact that you chose to be, this is who we are. Who we are on the podcast is the same as who we are on social media, and that's kind of the thing. Is there? How do I want to put it? It seems like there's no qualms that you guys have had on getting online, especially a site like Reddit, where there can be some risk about taking that Reddit username and being able to tie it into a real person. And how do you reconcile with that?
I think I just go back again to having been a reporter that, you get a column, your face is published with that. People know who you are. There's an expectation. Working with people, working with young people with social media, that you wouldn't do anything that your boss or your parents and whomever are right behind you, that you would imagine that they're right there with you. And I think that just as a general rule of thumb, and that we try to make sane decisions.
I know for me, it's this weird line. I don't mind podcasting multiple times a week if the content calls for it. I don't mind assigning my name to it. Meanwhile, no one, I'm maybe outside my wife, nobody knows I podcast. So when it's, the Thanksgiving get together, it's like my secret identity is the podcast me, at least when I'm with family members, because I don't want to get into where's the podcast up to, or what is like, I said everything I wanted to say on the podcast. Same thing, no one in my workplace knows I was in a meeting just on Friday, and the topic of there are podcasts out there, and I'm like, well, that's interesting. Many people listen to podcasts. Oh, let me write that down. So
right.
it's this weird, like I present my real self in the podcast, but my podcast self, I don't necessarily bring home.
Well, thank you guys so much for coming on.
Thank you for having us.
I was really excited to talk to you, and your podcast is great. I love TV. I love, pop culture, geek stuff is right up my alley. So
really appreciate it.
I also really appreciated how your Brightburn podcast saved me some money.
You're welcome.
Like Geico. Well, we hope that you guys enjoyed our podcast.
Absolutely.
And we hope you all tune in to hear us for the next one. we'll leave you with Dag's Trek trivia of the day.
Did you know that when Star Trek The Next Generation was in conception phase, they were coming up with the idea that Dr. Crusher's character would have a kid, and originally it was a daughter named Leslie Crusher.
We are Beyond Trek Podcast. Lower your inhibitions and surrender your ears. We will add inspirational and hilarious Trek content to your day. Your attention will adapt to subscribe to us. Resistance is futile.